Hello, time to talk about some theory. This is the theory episode. I figured we'd do it before I do the burn-in episode and the final preparations, simply because of that extended time we've got due to the big wet that's coming. So I figured it'd be a good chance for me to get a video out that explains how a bloomery furnace works, because this is something that is just not properly explained out there at the moment. There's no good content on this, just none that I've found, which is funny because there's so many videos on bloomeries. They're all rushed, and as you have seen from this series, this series is not rushed. So I wanted to explain what's going on inside the foundry and what the team or the person doing the actual smelt is going to be doing and looking for. And I'm going to try and make this as sort of chronological as I can. However, it will jump around a little bit because there is a big swath of wisdom with it rather than knowledge. There's practicable, experiential sort of knowledge that comes from having done this multiple times that was super secretive and held in trust and passed down from master to apprentice. And these secrets were worth more than the knowledge. The wisdom was worth more than the knowledge, if that makes sense. Now that sounds wanky. I'll explain why. I'm at the point where I only have the knowledge because this is my first time doing a smelt. And so I'm very much looking forward to getting a bit of that wisdom. But I do know the theories of what that wisdom entailed, and I'm going to try and share that with you. So as we talked about in the last episode, the ore that we put in is not being melted. What's happening is layers of that ore are being put in the top and basically riding like an elevator down inside the smelter to reach the bottom. And by the time they have reached the bottom, they have gone through a reduction process, which means any oxygen content in the substructure has been burnt away, leaving just iron behind. The only part that's liquefied is the gangue, which is the stuff that is not iron oxides, basically. So the ore is made up of iron oxides and other stuff. The other stuff is called gangue. We get rid of the other stuff. We burn it off, melt it, liquefy it, and hopefully seep it out as what will turn into slag at the bottom, because you've probably seen in bloomery smelts they tap slag out of the bottom of the foundry during the process. So we'll get to slag in a little bit because that's a whole topic. So that elevator ride down is important. The speed at which it happens is important. The size of the layer is important. So that's kind of what I want to cover first up. So the first stage is going to be getting the foundry hot. You don't want to do that quickly. You want to start out by to have the foundry ready to smelt. You start out with a very small fire in the bottom. That fire is everything. That's what wakes the foundry back up, because remember, we've already fired it at this point. It's already been charred on the inside and ceramified on the inside. So we've got to light a new fire in it, get it starting to warm the clay back up. Then we'll put in a bit of charcoal on top of that fire once it's going, and we'll bring that charcoal up to temperature. And then we'll add a little bit more charcoal and bring that up to temperature. And then more and bring it up, and we'll do this all the way up to the top. We'll do it very gradually over the course of like an hour, hour and a half, so as not to introduce too much thermal shock. Once it's at the top and it's burning at the top, we're ready to start, and we can add our first charge. So you'll often hear in people doing bloomeries that there's like a certain ratio of how much ore to charcoal you need to add. It's not quite as scientific as that. Doing it that way and thinking of it that way is focusing on the knowledge and not the wisdom. And I'm gonna try and make this make sense. I promise. There's trickery afoot with this. So Essentially, what you're going to be doing is adding a layer of ore, and you want that layer of ore to cover the entire surface of the inside of the tube, so you'll cover it in there. How thick you make that layer, how deep, is going to depend on the quality of your ore and the size of the foundry as well. So the layers of ore on good quality ore is going to be as high as 4 inches thick. And so 4 inches thick at our foot diameter of our foundry, that's about 4 kilos of dried roasted ore. It's a significant size charge. If you've got, that would be if it was ideal ore, absolutely perfect quality ore. So we're running about 50% magnetic content in our ore, and so I am bringing that down to about 50%. So my layers are going to be about 2 inches thick, maybe a little bit more, because I do suspect that there's more than just the magnetic content in the ore. And I'm quite happy with the ore quality that I've got. So it's going to be between 2 and 2.5 inches thick, my layers. So I will work out the volume of that, basically. And you can kind of get an idea of that by just having a flat surface and laying out some of your roasted ore. Like, draw a circle on there that is the inside diameter of your foundry, and see what a pile that's appropriate thickness. Like, if you have really bad quality ore, you might only want to go 1 inch thick. So given your pieces are about 1 inch round, like the size of a walnut, that'd be one layer, nothing stacked on top of each other. But if you've got good quality ore like me, 2.5 inches, 3 inches is good. That's what you want. And there's no ratio to the charcoal to be had here. If you have processed your charcoal properly, which we'll be getting into in the next video, you have good charcoal management. You just put in a layer of that ore when the top layer of your charcoal has burnt down to about 15-20 centimeters below the top of the foundry. You use a shovel or something to lay that ore along the top, and then you cover the whole thing in charcoal right back up to the top of the foundry again. How much that is irrelevant, basically. You want to then bring the fire, just like when we started the fire off and we're putting in layers of charcoal, you want to bring that upper layer of charcoal up to a burn again. And you want to just let that burn down. And as it burns down, every time the charcoal level gets 15 to 20 centimeters below the surface, you will add more charcoal, and you just keep adding more charcoal. And between ore charges for a foundry this size, all of this is for the size that we've built, which is a pretty typical size for a little village foundry. You will do 45 minutes to an hour between charges. And in the meantime, every time the charcoal burns down to a certain point, you top it back up again. So what are we looking for? Because this is the whole process. You just keep doing this for the rest of it until you run out of ore. That seemingly on the surface, it seems quite simple, right? What's happening though, that's the knowledge. At intervals through this process, you need to get rid of the slag buildup, and you need to maintain airflow with your bellows. And that's it. That's your knowledge of how a bloomery smelt works. The wisdom comes from two things, really, or three things. One is we'll start with the simplest one, which is the breath. It's the only way I can describe it, is the breath. People who have only ever used gas forges won't know what I'm talking about here. So I highly recommend you try, go to a friend's place who has a solid fuel forge, or if you've got one, fire it up and bring it to a forge welding temperature. Solid fuel forges, particularly like charcoal, coal and charcoal, I'm pretty sure coke does it too. When you reach forge welding temperature, you can hear it. I'm going to try and capture it on the day, but the forge suddenly makes this otherworldly breathing sound. And the closest thing I can think of is if you've ever tried making a small fire, which at this point in the process you probably have for roasting ore and such, When you blow on a fire to strengthen it, and you get the blow right, because, you know, I've done my video on charcoal forges, solid fuel forges. Watch that one because I talk about this a lot. Adding air to a fire in just the right way. So if you're blowing on a fire, it's more of a like voluminous and not too fast. When you do that, you will know, or if you've ever used bellows on a fire, it makes this sort of rushing breathing sound that's basically the fire telling you, yes, I am at peak heat. So red fire, not blue fire, but red fire, when you are aspirating it and adding air into it, will make this rushing breathing sound. And a coal forge will do the same thing when you're at forge welding temperature. And you'll know that say you're using a crank blower, you'll know that the speed you're cranking at is the right speed. And you stay at that speed and you will hold it at forge welding temperature. The instinct with a bloomery furnace is that you would want to get it as hot as humanly possible. That's not actually the case. What you actually want to do is get it up to forge welding temperatures. So about 1200 degrees to 1300 degrees Celsius. I'll put the freedom degrees down there. You want it to be sitting in that range. And no hotter. We're not trying to liquefy the iron here, as we talked about in the last episode. So if you haven't watched that, do go and watch it. The aim isn't to liquefy it. The aim is to reduce it. So once you reach the point where out of the top of your foundry you can hear that breathing rushing sound, you know that's the speed to be blowing. If you're using an electric blower, use your speed control, get it to that speed. So when you first start your fire, it's going to have to be nice and low and slow, but as you build it bigger and bigger, you increase and increase until you out the top are hearing that breathing rushing sound. Then you know you're at forge welding temperatures. And you need to hold it there. Now, there are things about the process that are going to change how much air needs to go in to hold that sound. If you are putting ore in too fast or too much at a time, the charges are too big, that can change it. If the pieces of ore are too fine, too small, that can create dead spots they can pack too close together and the air can't fit through it. So the flow of the air as it moves up is going to have to shift and move to get around those dead spots. You don't want that. If your charcoal was crushed up too fine or it's got dust through it, that can also create those blockages and dead spots. Now, this is a fire that you're going to be maintaining for like 4 to 8 hours. So it's going to shift and change and evolve over time, and you need to keep your ear peeled to hear that sound and adjust accordingly. It may take you actually physically breaking up blockages with your reach and stick down inside. I would advise you mess with it as little as possible, but if you have to break something up, then you have to do it. One thing that can happen is a thing called bridging, where the charcoal over the hot spot where the bloom is forming actually compacts because it's burning and turns to dust, and it will create this sort of natural arch over it, and the charcoal can't go past it anymore. If that happens, that needs to break apart. If you're using coke instead of charcoal, then you can form clinker, and that needs to be cleared. But these changes, these alterations in how the air flows through it are going to be perpetually making the air needs of the foundry change. And that's where that wisdom comes from. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to hear it. And based on what you hear, you need to control your airflow, or you may need to actually resolve a problem. So you may need to adjust the amount of ore you're adding, the frequency at which you're adding it. You might need to adjust the charcoal. You might need to maybe even tap the slag, because the slag buildup can affect the airflow patterns as well. The second thing that you need to be watching for is the foundry walls itself. It's going to crack even more. It's just part of the process, because especially if it's clay. If it's refractory and fire brick, probably not as much. But if it's natural, like the one we're building here, medieval style, it's going to crack. That's just part of it. The only cracks that matter are ones that you can see fire through. if you can see fire through them, they need to be repaired for two reasons. One, it's starting to get structural, and two, it's actually letting air in that you're not controlling. So all of the air that goes into this, because of what we talked about just before, needs to be air that you are in full control of. Otherwise, there's chaotic elements that are going to be throwing you for a loop. So any cracks that you can see fire through, if you look down into the crack, you can see fire, or if you see fire coming out of the crack, they need to be repaired. And you don't do this with slip. Slip is far too wet for this process. So you want to have a batch of the same mixture that you made the furnace with. So whatever you use, say clay, sand, ash, and straw, you want to have a big old block of that pre-made up and pre-moistened so that it can be applied easily. The moisture level is just that, what the level at which you can apply it easily. You want to have that on hand and have your a tool so that you're not having to touch it with your bare hands. Some sort of applicator tool like a mortar trowel, to be able to slap that over the crack and work it in and have it as an ad hoc repair. It won't be a great repair, but if it seals up the crack, that's fine. The person who is in charge of the smelt, and there must be one person in charge, let me tell you, this is too chaotic to have multiple chiefs and no Indians. You want to have one person in charge. Cracks should only be repaired once it's approved by the person in charge. You need to have one person making the calls on whether it's assessed or not, because every time you repair a crack, you're introducing moisture into it, and that can lead to steam explosions. So you don't want people adding moisture without your knowledge. It's just a safety concern at that point. The other type of crack is one near the bottom, which is allowing slag to leak out. If slag is leaking out, that's bad as well, also needs to be fixed. Be extra careful repairing those ones though, because slag is akin to lava. It's not actually lava, but it's akin to lava. In all practical senses, it is just like lava, and it will burn you just as bad. So that's the watching aspect of it. And the third thing that is part of the wisdom is the slag tapping. Slag tapping is a topic that honestly could have its own entire video on it, because the slag will tell you more about how the foundry is going and how the smelt is going than any other factor. More than the breath, more than the foundry itself, it will tell you everything. So you're going to need to sort of plan out a schedule of the tapping, because every time you tap the slag, it's kind of like if you're baking a cake, opening the door of the oven. You lose a significant amount of heat every time you open the door of the oven, and the oven struggles more in order to maintain the heat inside. Opening this tapping arch does the same thing, but you need to get that slag out of there. So you need to find the balance between how often you want to tap it to keep it drained and not let it build up too much, and also keeping the heat inside. So for my schedule, you're going to see 2 rounds of charging the ore. So a round will go in, an hour will pass, and a round will go in, an hour will pass, and it's the time for the third charge. That's when I'll do my first slag tap. The first slag tap is arguably the most important, because if you're doing the same size charges all the time, you should be able to make an assumption about how much slag, the rate at which the slag is building up inside there. So I'll break open the tap arch, remove the fire brick, let the slag drain out, reach in and scrape out on, because there's the dome and the donut around it, I'll scrape around the sides of the dome to try and get as much of that slag out as possible. I'll close up the door and repack the sides with clay to make it airtight again. That process needs to happen as quickly as possible, 30 to 60 seconds. While you're doing that, you want to take the airflow going in to 50%. Whatever you've got it at, halve that. Because if you've got full ball forge welding pressures and you suddenly open a hole in the bottom, you can actually spray liquid slag out because it's a positive pressure environment, and the air suddenly has a new channel it can go. So slow that air down to 50%. You can afford to, if you're using charcoal or lump charcoal, you can afford to actually stop the air for a little while. I don't recommend it, but you can. If you're using coke, don't ever stop the air. It will just go out. So this is the part that's going to be hard to explain. So you're going to be looking for clues in the slag that will tell you how the smelt is going. If the slag comes out watery, we're just talking about the consistency of it first. If it comes out watery, you've been running the fire too hot. Probably not too much too hot, but too hot. And you need to dial it back a little bit from where it is. If it comes out too thick and it's like cold honey, you have several potential problems. One of them is that it is you haven't been running it hot enough. Another potentially means that you haven't got enough slag production going on, like it's not the slag isn't liquefying enough, which means you might need to add additional flux with your charges. Borax is fine, just use borax, and that's going to come down to the quality of your ore. Another factor can be if there are chunks in your slag. It should be glassy and smooth. If there are chunks in it, it could indicate that it's not hot enough, or that you're actually not reducing your iron properly. So you are potentially adding too much ore too fast, and it's not getting a chance to reduce, and it's just ending up in the slag. A certain amount of iron is always going to end up in your slag, but you want to try and minimize how much it is. So if there are chunks in it, that's also bad. What you want to look for in terms of consistency is like warm honey. So you know how if you actually heat honey up, it will run quite freely, but is still globs together and is sticky. That's what you want to look for. Here is an absolute textbook example of the type of consistency you want to see your slag have. See how it's flowing very freely, but at the same time you can see how sticky it is. That's what you want to see. That is perfect, and I've got a link to their video here. It's worth watching. Absolutely textbook, just chef kiss. That's what you want to see. So that's your first round of indications of how to read the slag and adjust accordingly. The next round is going to happen after you've blocked the tapping arch back up again and given that slag chance to dry and cool, because when it comes out, it's going to be white hot. When it cools down, it's going to harden into what looks like cooled lava, and the color of it and the texture of it is going to be telling. So once again, if it was chunky, you may not have seen it while it was hot, but you will definitely see it when it's cool if there are chunks in it. If it's chunky, you're adding too much ore too fast. So maybe just drop the volume of ore you're putting in each charge by maybe 25%, and that'll be a really good start marker. And then you want to look at the color that it dries. Anywhere that's sort of black to charcoal gray to a green color, really good. You're on track. Everything's going well. However, if it dries and it's sort of reddish in color, it means too much of your iron is making it through into the slag, which means potentially you're running it too hot, potentially, or you're adding too much too fast and you need to dial it back. So there's a lot more to reading slag than just this, but once again, I only have theoretical knowledge at this point, and the secrets of it are only apparent to those who have done many of these sorts of smelts and have built up this knowledge. But those are enough things to get you started, especially since we're doing a very fairly hobby-sized amount of ore through this, while the size of the foundry is very practical and real size for like a small medieval village to use. We're only aiming to produce like a baseball-sized bloom for our first time. So there's really not that much that can go wrong, which is good. But this is a really good chance for you to learn and to observe these things and start gaining some of this wisdom if it's something that you plan on doing multiple times. So our first slag tapping happened at the end of the second charge cycle. So from then on, when you tap the slag is going to depend on what you saw during that first one. You've got to have like a mental image of what sort of volume you're dealing with inside your foundry. It gets problematic if your slag level gets above the level of the size of your bloom. And it gets really problematic if it gets above the level of your tuya. If the amount of slag that builds up gets above the level of your tuya, you've got bigger problems. But you want your bloom to be sort of floating on a little bed of slag and then drain it away, and then it'll build up again, and then it'll float a little bit and then drag it away. That's ideal. So when you tapped the slag after the second charge, look at how much slag came out, visualize it in the base, fitting around the donut, and think, do you think that would have filled the donut to the point where the bloom would be just sitting on top of it? Would it be deeper than that? Would it be less than that? And that will enable you to make a good educated guess of how many more charges you can add before you have to tap it again. And it gives you your baseline tapping interval. You might find that 2 was really good, and so every second charge cycle you will do a tap. But like I said before, you want to try and minimize the number of times that you tap, but also tap when necessary, because if you try and opt to not tap, bad things happen. So listening to your foundry becomes very important there, because if you are building up too much slag, you will hear it. You'll hear the effects that it has. It'll also prevent your bloom from forming properly. You want to have a nice round structure at the end of it, and it won't have that if it's always floating in a giant pool of slag that hasn't been tapped and has been allowed to build up. What happens if you never tap the slag, which I've seen some YouTube videos do, they just don't tap it. They just get iron prills at the end of it. Prills are little pea-sized bits of iron. So you'll break the thing open at the end, and you'll just find this hardened massive slag with little prills of iron all the way through it. And that's just because the bloom all the iron was just dropping into this pool of slag, and it never had a chance to coalesce into the ball. If you tap it regularly enough, then it forms into the ball. But at the same time, if you tap it too regularly, the ball won't form because it will get too cool in there. So find that balance. And that's why the first tapping is super important, because it gives you that information. And you just complete this process until you run out of ore. When you run out of ore, when you run out of ore is going to depend on if you've changed the size of your charges. If your tapping's been going fine and the breathing has been going fine and the airflow has been going fine, there's no reason for you to change the size of the charges. But read the situation and adjust accordingly. 45 minutes to an hour per charge in a foundry this size. If you end up having a lower quality ore and you're doing shorter layers, then you can afford to do quicker intervals. If you're only doing like 1 inch layers or 1.5 inch layers, you could get away with as low as like 30-minute intervals. But realistically, if you've got a decent-ish quality ore or above, 2 to 3 inch layers, 45 minutes to an hour per charge. And once again, just keep letting it burn down till it's 15-20 centimeters below the top of the foundry, and then add charcoal to fill it back up again, and just let it keep burning down. When you've done your last charge, you are now in the wind down phase. And this is super important, and a lot of people miss it. They think that once that last ore has gone down, you just let it burn down. But no, keep feeding it charcoal at the same way. Every time it goes down a little bit, fill it back up, and keep it burning for 90 minutes, 2 hours if you can, Just keep feeding it, let it burn, let it burn, let it burn at that full temperature until that 90 minutes, 2 hours is up. You're going to keep it full and keep it hot. Then all of a sudden, you're going to keep the air going, but not feed any more charcoal in. At that point, you're going to watch the layer of charcoal go down gradually until you can feel more than see that the level of charcoal is just above where the top of your bloom is. And if you want to use your pokey stick to feel, that's good. You can do that. Just be careful you don't burn yourself. And that's when you get to pull out your bloom. So if this is a single-use thing, you can break open the side of your foundry and pull it out. Or if you're a madman like me, you'll reach in the top and grab it with your bloomery tongs. Now, the thing about the bloom is that iron, when it's sintering temperatures, is extremely sticky. And so it is very likely that it is stuck to the side or the base of your foundry. And so get a good handle on it with your tongs, because remember, ours is only going to be a small bloom, so this is very practical and reasonable to do. Twist it. Make a twisting motion to try and break it away, and then you should be able to lift it out. If it needs help, get somebody else with the pry bar to try and loosen it, being careful not to break the walls of your foundry. And once it's pulled out, it's time for the initial consolidation. And the initial consolidation is very important. This is the hottest that your bloom is likely to ever be. It's going to be very hard to get it up to the temperature that it is now again. So make use of the heat while you've got it. You can now cut the air at this point. You don't need to be continuing to add air once the bloom's out. You just let the furnace get cool. You're going to pull it out and bring it over to a wooden stump is really good. A hard surface at this point I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because the bloom is going to be an odd shape. It's going to be ball-like, but not a ball. And so, because it's ball-like, if you put it on like an anvil and try and hit it from the top, it can fly off. And you do not want a 1200-degree ball of iron flying at high speed. So stumps are really good for this because they have give in them. And you want to have a trusted hitter as your primary hitter. You'll have it in tongs, and you'll find a good orientation for it where it feels like if it was to be hit from the top, it would be stable. And you designate your primary hitter. You tell them instructions. There are many different ways to do this and many different historical traditions for this. I'm going to give you one that you can use, but you can use whatever you want. A good way to do it is to say to the hitter a number, 1, 2, or 3. A 1 means basically drop the sledgehammer on it with just the weight of the sledgehammer, nothing else. A 2 means give it a tap, like add a little bit of hit to it. And a 3 is a full-size hit. And so you, as the person controlling the bloom, are going to be like, where's something I can use? Let's just say this is our bloom. You're going to be positioning it here, maybe knock that corner down, and then you'll put it there and put that corner down, and you'll be telling them, 1, 1, 1, all right, maybe 2, and then 3, and then once you get it to a point where it feels like wailing on this thing, it's not going to go anywhere, it's solid, everybody can just go nuts with their hammers, and you want to hammer the ever-loving snot out of it. Because, like I said, it's the hottest it's ever going to be, and so it's the most plastic it's ever going to be, which means you can consolidate it and refine it to a certain extent. Because if it ends up staying as a ball, when you come to have to actually refine it fully, which is a process, it's going to be a pain. Because the process of refining it means drawing it out into a bar, folding it, welding it, drawing it out, folding it, welding it, drawing it out, and doing that at least 3 or 4 times, at least, depending on the quality of the iron that you get. So if it's already in like a bar-ish form, that's going to be a lot easier than if it's in a bowl form. So get it to a point where it's stable and will be able to withstand the hitting without going flying, and then go to town on it. And that's it. That's how you do it. And then by the end of it, you've got wrought iron ready to be refined, which is I'm going to be showing that process in a video as well. And that's the entire process. And during the live stream, I'm not really going to be able to explain things as much as I'd like. So this video is like a companion video so that you will be able to know the theory and be watching with educated eyes when you watch the live stream, whether you're there for it or watch it back. And you'll know exactly what I'm doing, what I'm looking for, what I'm listening for, why I'm being so hard on the people that are working with me, etc., etc. So yeah, hopefully that has answered any of the mysterious questions that you may have had about the bloomery process. So if you have additional questions, do drop them below because I will try my best to answer them. But otherwise, yeah, hang around for the live stream and you get to actually watch this whole process happen literally in real time. I don't think I'll live stream the entire thing because an 8-hour live stream might be a bit harrowing, but I will live stream like the final charge and the burn down and hopefully with the refinement and things like that, even if I have to break it into multiple live streams. I will try and edit it into a video that sort of captures the highlights as well, maybe with some narration, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I may be busy. It's a lot of work. But yeah, once again, big thank you for watching this series. I know it's not exactly the most highly entertaining stuff in the world, but it's cool to be putting this knowledge out there for once because it's just been wrapped up in so much mystery for so long. Especially since, you know, the process of tamahagane is very famous and popular and everything, but it's actually, you know, global scale, really niche. The bloomery furnace with ironstone as the ore has been the absolute workhorse of iron production throughout history, and it does not get the credit that it deserves. So I'm glad to be able to actually put this information out there in a form that you could actually go and do this yourself, and I hope you do. Once again, big thank you to my patrons for supporting me during this. I've also started channel memberships, by the way, so if you want to get some extra behind the scenes on this process and other things that I do, consider becoming a member. It really helps. It helps me be able to spend more time doing this stuff instead of desperately trying to keep the bills paid. Or become a patron because my Patreon supporters are awesome and they really help contribute to what I do. And big thanks to Kevin for booking this whole thing. Anyway, guys, the next episode I'll talk to you about your charcoal preparation and the tooling that we need, as well as firing the foundry. It's going to be pretty cool to actually fire it and turn it into ceramic after all of this time. But yeah, thank you for following along, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.